I've never been much of a driver. I think my parents
First up, needed to come through a guy named Nelson Dahl, who was a fan of my radio show. And he took... Well, have you heard of Broken Social Scene?
Yes.
Yeah. Feist. What? Feist came out of that, yes. Well, Broken Social Scene was created, the producer, the genius, was Dave Newfeld in Toronto. They now talk about, in the last 5 years since Broken Social Scene, when the Canadian indie scene kind of be the dominant producers of fun-loving music or whatever, people liking it, you know, they call that the Dave Newfeld era now.
Oh, cool.
Now, Dave Newfeld was a kid that I knew at the radio station. He's down in Toronto. He became my news director.
I'm Free Radio Olympia.
Actually, a friend of mine's news director.
Yeah.
It does get very complex.
Free Radio
It used to be the cartoon outline. And my friend Dave Newfeld was news director. He got fired from the station due to station politics. He got a raw deal. But he decided, since he's been a musician, look into the news. Because he had musical ability, he got really good at it. And by 1990, a guy named Nelson Dahl, who was wealthy, he's one of 5 families that own the Toronto Star. And he's stand here. And this newspaper guy, Nelson Dahl, peon of 1/5 of the owners of the Toronto Star, he liked my show. He got involved with an investment deal with Dave Newfeld, and they were going to invest in an invention. The invention fell apart, but Nelson had set aside some money to do this investment, since he needed to have, annual tax write-off, spend some money on trivial projects just for tax reasons. He wanted to get rid of the money anyways, since the investor thing fell through. The invention, the guy, whatever he invented, something happened and it didn't turn out. So Nelson calls up Dave, says, you get pretty good on the computer there. Why don't you take some Bob Dobbs tapes and make an album out of it? Like the Marsh McLuhan album of 1967 called The Medium is Massage, which is a collage of, you might have heard it, sound like that. So do that to Bob. So Dave calls me up, and this is in December 90, and he says, Nelson proposed this. What do you think? And I said, well, how did this happen? So then he told me about this investment and the leftover money, and Nelson wants to invest in something. So I got up to speed on that. I said, well, don't involve with me, because I'm not going to do anything with Nelson. You're going to go through torture if you work with Nelson. He goes, really? And I said, yep, but do it anyway. Just know this, keep him as far away as possible, but he'll be bugging you. But this is a great opportunity. You're going to get paid to make this album. Call me in a year when you're ready to talk or to play for me or something. So, of course, he didn't wait a year. Pretty soon he's calling me up complaining about how bad Nelson is, driving him nuts. I had to help him through that. But that was my only involvement in the album, was helping Dave put up with Nelson. And so that goes through 91 into early 92. And then on April 22nd, which is 4/22, Nelson receives the album from the factory, and Newfeld sends me over a copy. I listen to it, and I like it. It's pretty good. So now they send the albums out to the alternative press, and there was a guy named Jerry Belanger in Toronto who had Dove. His label was Dove, D-O-V, Death of Vinyl. He had been starting to put out independently produced stuff in a small circuit, so he became the first distributor Nelson hired for Bob's. It was called Bob's Media Ecology. Bob's Media Ecology, and he made some ads, unbeknownst to Nelson, where he stuck the Subgenius J.R. Bob Dobbs image into the ads. And I guess the American guys in Dallas saw this and thought that our product was being represented as their stuff. Right. So they get all mad and threatened to sue. I know that Nelson told Jerry to stop doing that, and it was stopped, and I think Nelson eventually took over the distribution. But Nelson never claimed anything to do with me. As a matter of fact, he eventually talked to Reverend Stang, called him up. And Nelson tells me, I don't know if this happened, but he tells me that he says to Doug St. Clair Smith, that's his real name, he says to Doug, is there anything on this album that sounds like stuff you put out? And he says, no, there's nothing on there. Other than there was one Subgenius song that Newfeld had bought the rights to from Buck Naked, and they added something. That was in the album. That was The X's Have Landed is the name of the song. And it was done by Reverend Buck Naked or somebody. Then Dave got the rights to it from paid Buck Naked, you know, $10 or something, and got a little kid to sing it, little girl. And that's on the album. It's really cute. Other than that, definitely what I talk about is not what the staying people talk about. Right. They talk about, well, you use the word slack. Well, why not, man? Everybody is aware of that word. Let's put it on. Doesn't mean I'm using your word. It's a word in the language. And I'm making fun of it. Well, actually, I'm not. It's not. That's what I did on the radio show. But they choose things. There were a couple of words that apparently the Church Subgenius said that was their words. Maybe if we talked about Subgenius, but I used to do that on the radio. I'd put on that whole cult that thought that I was J.R. Bob Dobbs. Right. But I wasn't. I was Bob Dobbs, which is my original name. So, in all that confusion, Sang and Nelson wouldn't talk to each other after a while. And Sang couldn't do any, or Doug couldn't do anything about what was happening in Canada because it was a different country, different copyright laws or whatever. I didn't pay attention to that. But as people heard the album, they would start saying, well, who's this Bob Dobbs guy? And want to interview him. So I ended up doing a lot of interviews in 92, 93, 94 because of the minor success and notoriety of the album. Right. And so that was my only involvement with that. And then, what else was to say? That's the overlap. But that's nothing to do with what I do. And Dave Newfeld, though, because the album did well, they also wanted to do another one. So he got Negative Land and Cold Cut or Coldplay, whichever one was back then. And another thing, somebody in the mass media. Steinsky and the mass media. Have you ever heard of them? Steinsky's mass media. They did versions of one of the songs from the album, different versions. Negative Land did it. And what I understand is that Negative Land called up Jerry, and Jerry said, well, can you do this? And they said, yeah. And they needed the money, so they did it, and they got paid. And then after, Doug St. Clair Smith went after them and said, hey, man, you're working with the enemy. So they felt bad about it, so they claimed that they were disconnected from it. But I asked Jerry Belanger, and he said, those guys, they were desperate for money. They knew what the problem, that there was an overlap of identification, and that, but they didn't care. They wanted the money, so they did it. It's only in retrospect, once the pressure was on them after they got the money, that they denied that they claimed they got ripped off. So I wasn't involved with that, but that's what I heard happened, and that was the two sides of it.